Good day, my name is Keith Feely, that's my email address, and that's the address I use on Twitter, which I use a great deal on a daily basis. This is another Keef Talk, and this one, as you can see, focuses upon intelligence. It's a word which you've probably come across on numerous occasions, but I suspect you've not really understood what it actually means, which is not surprising because it's been quite confusingly misunderstood over the last 100 or so years. You will see I've started off by putting a couple of definitions or explanations from somebody who would have been considered to be extremely intelligent, Albert Einstein, but notice that he focuses upon the ability to change with the first one, and in the second one how to be creative and imaginative. And he considers those to be much more important qualities than perhaps anything else. However, at the bottom there you will see a more modern day definition. That's, if you look it up, you will find on Google or in a dictionary: intelligence, the unique propensity, ability, of human beings to be able to change and modify the structure of their cognitive functioning, how we think and how we manage to cope, to adapt to the changing demands of a life situation. Basically, it's trying to focus upon how we have the ability, and very intelligent abilities, to be able to adapt to an ever-changing world. And this is crucial because what we need to consider as we go through this is that one of the things which we are perhaps not conscious of is that intelligence has been used, perhaps abused, for a great number of years. This is actually an example perhaps which is very personal, because in 1963 I was considered to be intelligent because I passed 11 plus. Many of you perhaps have never heard of 11 plus. It was a very strange stroke exam that we took in England at the age of 11, and it decided which schools you were going to go to, or which type of school you were going to. Because I passed 11 plus, which almost nobody, well, we knew nobody at the time who'd ever done that, I was sent to a completely different school to my older brother and sister, who were at the time considered to be less intelligent. And you can imagine that wasn't a very popular thing in my family or with anybody else. Consequently, let's start at trying to understand what the derivation of intelligence might be. It comes from a Latin word, like much in the English language, which means to be comprehend, perceive, understand. And basically it's trying to focus upon the ability to reason, plan and solve problems, think abstractly, understand complex ideas. So it's historically considered to be more about problem solving, decision making. And consequently what we've got to do is then consider how that relates to modern life. And modern life is the centre of this, what I think is an extremely funny American sitcom called Big Bang Theory. It focuses upon few key characters who are meant to be considered to be traditionally intelligent. They pass lots of exams, geeks is the modern word, but their inability to cope with adapting new situations and the new environments, as you've seen previously there, is very much the focus point of the humour. So it's arguable as to whether they really are intelligent. However, let's look at the historical derivation and I suppose use of the word intelligence, and it goes back perhaps to Alfred Binet in 1906, who was credited with having the first intelligence test. He was asked by the French government to work out a way of selecting and identifying children who would struggle in school. Feeble-minded was one of the phrases which was used, and consequently he came up with a series of questions which basically sifted out those people who couldn't answer them and they were considered to be unsuitable or would struggle a great deal in school. Now, Binet himself never considered this to be something which you were born with or innate or anything like that, and he didn't consider the measurement to be anything of great real worth, but that was what he was asked to do. However, in 1915, as you can see, in America, Louis Terman decided to use and adapt that IQ test. That's what it became known, and it was established in America after the First World War as the standard assessment test, the SATs as they call it over there, which became a very important part of school life in America, and indeed still is. And it created a system probably internationally, where intelligence tests were believed that they could be assessed by written tests or written exams. And it's important to note that there was never any scientific basis behind that, and consequently that's what it became established under. And in this country, in England, in 1933, another psychologist, Cyril Burt, basically brought out a book called How the Mind Works. He was given a great deal of credit because he defined human intelligence as the all-round intellectual ability, which is inherited, it's innate, it's got nothing to do with teaching or training, and it means that you will be able to cope with almost anything, and it can be measured by a fairly simple test or examination. Notice how different that is from what Binet purported many years before, 30 odd years before. Now, later on, it was discovered that Cyril Burt actually made up a good chunk, virtually all of his research evidence, and there was actually no scientific basis behind that definition or even those statements. However, in 1944 they didn't know that, and it was used by the government to decide who would be going to certain schools and who would not. And that's why when I took my 11 plus in 1963, it meant that I was selected to go to a grammar, well in fact in my case it was a technical school, where as my brother and sister hadn't passed that, like everybody else in our area, and they were just sent to the school round the corner. Consequently, what it means is that it became very entrenched within our education system for a great period of time. When I started teaching in 1974 in England, that had started to be abandoned, and most areas got rid of 11 plus, though it still does exist in a few areas. However, in 1983, Howard Gardner, following a great deal of research, managed to discover that actually the 11 plus was really only focusing upon a very small area, what he classified as one or two of the intelligence, the multiple intelligences. His book, Frames of Mind, was very well received because it actually explained to a lot of people what intelligence perhaps is really much more about. And you will see that he identified at the time 7 different intelligences. He later added one, and it's now quite well known about multiple intelligences. In fact, at the same time, another psychologist, Robert Sternberg at Cornell University, did a similar sort of thing and focused upon trying to define and explain intelligence with again a great deal of research, and he ended up with a triarchic theory of intelligence, where he was looking at 3 different areas: analytical, which is very much the cognitive, trying to analyse and work out academically problems and things of that nature; creative, which is very much what Einstein was talking about with the imagination, where we're dealing with trying to think, so I suppose, outside the box, thinking things in a totally new way; and a practical intelligence areas where we're able to put into action and apply, particularly in the social areas, those 5 areas, the things that we're able to cope with in society. Consequently, it means that for probably at least 30 years, since the 1990s when I did my Masters, there's been quite a well-known, I suppose, furor at the traditional concept of intelligence, and this newspaper article from the Telegraph in 2012 is perhaps typical of the perhaps growing realisation that intelligence is actually not measured at all by written exams or IQ tests. And what we really need, if we're to try to decide if people are intelligent, is a much broader and a much more effective method of assessment. Consequently, the next slide has perhaps a definition which is an amalgam of most of what comes around, and you'll see that in the first slide from Fernstein, another psychologist. An intelligent individual is meant to be one who has the ability or skills, intelligences, as they're called there, to understand and deal with the difficulties of life. It's important for us now to appreciate that intelligence is much more about coping with the everyday problems that we have in life. And that's why I've used this poster here and tried to explain that the essence of that and how I put it together 20-30 years ago was trying to be, if you like, simplifying the concept that most people have. And that's why if we're talking about an intelligent individual, then we're really talking about these 8 areas, these 8 intelligences if you want. But basically we've got characteristics is another term that we use, but they are the ways in which, if we're developed them to a high level, we can cope very well with life. We've got good chances of getting good health, good well-being, and perhaps what we might classify as succeeding in life. Therefore, if we're to try to get an assessment of how intelligent people are, we've got to focus upon the fact that dealing with intelligences, skills, abilities, characteristics will take time. So consequently, it's worthwhile considering how we measure skills and abilities in areas which are perhaps are more familiar with that. In music, in art, in sport, in those sorts of areas, measuring skills has become quite commonplace, and it is perhaps more commonplace in early years. And the essence of that is that it has to be seen to be operating in certain environments over a long period of time. That's why the frequency that we display those skills is actually going to be how they can be measured. And we certainly can't do it with a simplistic test or written exam. Well, I hope that has been some assistance to you. Hope you now realise that almost certainly you're very intelligent. It's just a question of where you're very intelligent and which of the very good intelligences you are very good at. I hope you'll come and see me again in the future, where I can explain a little bit more about other things which will amaze you. Thank you.